Mike Hailwood, the most talkative man in motorcycle racing, was left utterly speechless. He had just won a Grand Prix, but the victory wasn't what stunned him. It was September 11th, 1966 at the Italian GP. He had just climbed off Honda's new RC166, a 250cc machine with an impossible engine, a screaming 18,000 RPM Inline-Six. This was more than just winning a race. It was the moment Japan proved it could not only compete with the best European motorcycles, but completely out-engineer them. The story of how they built this mechanical masterpiece starts with a single, shocking promise. In 1954, motorcycle racing belonged to Europe. Italian MV Agusta ruled like kings. Their red machines collected world championships with ease. British Norton and other rivals controlled whatever MV didn't want. These weren't just motorcycles, they were symbols of European engineering power. Beautiful machines that combined art with performance in ways that seemed impossible to copy. Then Soichiro Honda made a promise that shocked the motorcycle world. Speaking to his employees on March 24, 1954, Honda declared, "The time has arrived. I have decided to enter the TT races next year. Never before has a Japanese entered this race with a motorcycle made in Japan." The Isle of Man TT wasn't just any race, it was the most dangerous and most prestigious motorcycle competition on Earth. Winners became legends, losers sometimes never came home. Honda was declaring war on European motorcycle racing with the machines that barely existed and experience that measured zero. When Honda first visited the Isle of Man in 1954, reality hit hard. The European race bikes were so advanced that Honda's engineers couldn't even understand how they worked. Honda's best motorcycles were basic transportation bikes designed for reliable commuting. The gap wasn't just technical, it was generational. European manufacturers had decades of racing development. Honda had enthusiasm and nothing else. Honda's first response was industrial spying. Engineers replaced their clothes with motorcycle parts in their suitcases. They smuggled European technology back to Japan. They bought rev counters and carburetors, anything they could study and copy. By 1959, Honda finally arrived at the Isle of Man with 5 riders and 5 RC142 race bikes. These 125cc twin-cylinder machines were Honda's first serious racing motorcycles. They featured double overhead cams, 4 valve heads, and 6-speed gearboxes. They were impressive for Honda, but nowhere near fast enough to win. Most finished the race, proving they were reliable. None threatened for victory. Honda had learned their first racing lesson. Reliability meant nothing without speed. The solution came through Honda's most radical decision. Instead of building bigger engines, they would build faster engines. Instead of more displacement, they would create more cylinders. 4 cylinders meant 4 power strokes per revolution instead of 2. More power strokes meant more power without increasing engine size. More power without more weight. The RC160 4-cylinder 250cc race bike debuted in 1959. This established Honda's multi-cylinder philosophy. 4 tiny cylinders working together could rev higher than 2 larger ones. Higher revs meant more power for the same displacement. But Honda's engineers weren't satisfied with 4 cylinders. They were already thinking 6. Through the early 1960s, Honda's racing program grew stronger. Their 4-cylinder bikes dominated smaller classes. They won world championships in 125 and 250cc categories. The recipe was working. More cylinders, higher revs, more power. But 2-stroke technology was advancing rapidly. Lighter and simpler 2-stroke engines were producing competitive power with half the complexity. Honda's sophisticated 4-strokes were being challenged by machines that seemed almost primitive. By 1964, Honda faced a crisis. Their 4-cylinder 250cc bikes were losing to 2-stroke competition. Yamaha and other manufacturers were proving that 4-stroke complexity wasn't always better than 2-stroke simplicity. Honda's response was the RC164, their first 6-cylinder race bike. 6 cylinders and 250 cubic centimeters meant engineering that pushed the boundaries of what was physically possible. 6 tiny pistons, 4 camshafts, and 24 valves all crammed into a package barely wider than Honda's 4-cylinder engines. The RC164 made 54 horsepower at 17,000 RPM. Those numbers represented a new category of internal combustion engine. It spun faster and produced more power per litre than anything else on wheels. But the first 6-cylinder had problems. Cooling issues forced Honda to slow down during races. The engine was a masterpiece of engineering that couldn't quite handle its own performance. 1 year later, Honda perfected their vision. The RC165 solved the cooling problems and increased power to 56 horsepower. Still impressive, but Honda knew they needed something more dramatic to compete with advancing 2-stroke technology. For 1966, Honda created the RC166. This wasn't just an update, it was a complete reimagining of what a motorcycle engine could be. The RC166 produced 65 horsepower from 250 cubic centimeters. The red line stretched to 18,000 RPM, with peak power arriving at screaming engine speeds that seemed impossible for any motorcycle. Each bore diameter measured about the width of 2 fingers. This created cylinders so tiny they seemed more like precision instruments than motorcycle components. 6 independent carburetors fed fuel to each cylinder. This required synchronization that bordered on mechanical magic. The short stroke design meant the pistons traveled less distance per revolution but moved incredibly quickly. Think of it like a hummingbird's wings versus an eagle's. The eagle's wings move powerfully but slowly. The hummingbird's wings move so fast they blur, creating lift through pure velocity. A 7-speed gearbox allowed riders to keep the engine spinning in its narrow power band across a wider range of track speeds. Most motorcycles of the era used 4 or 5 speeds. The RC166's 7 ratios meant you could always find the perfect gap to keep those 6 cylinders singing at perfect efficiency. But the numbers only told part of the story. The RC166's real weapon was its sound. 6 tiny cylinders firing in perfect sequence created a mechanical symphony unlike anything heard before. The engine didn't rumble or growl like conventional motorcycles, it screamed like a Formula 1 car shrunk down to motorcycle size. At full throttle, the RC166 produced a banshee wail that announced Honda's presence from miles away. The sound climbed higher and higher until it seemed like the engine might tear itself apart from pure velocity. 6 individual exhaust pipes created a wall of sound that was both beautiful and terrifying. Each pipe produced its own note, but together they created harmonics that seemed to vibrate inside your chest cavity. Racing journalist Dennis Jenkinson described hearing the RC166 for the first time. A terrible wall of sound blasted us all as he accelerated away. The word terrible wasn't criticism. It was awe mixed with genuine fear at what Honda had created. Test riders described the experience as otherworldly. The engine would rev from idle to redline in fractions of a second. Touch the throttle wrong and you could destroy the entire engine instantly. The RC166 could top 150 miles per hour. Which sounds modest today, but represented serious velocity in 1966. More importantly, it reached that speed faster than anything else on the track. The combination of low weight and high revving power created acceleration that left competitors struggling to understand what they'd just witnessed. 6 cylinders meant 6 times the complexity of a single-cylinder engine. Oil passages narrower than pencil-lead fed lubrication to components so small they could be bent by hand. Internal parts moved so quickly they became blurs at operating speed. The dual overhead camshafts operated 24 valves. Each valve was about the size of a pencil eraser. At 18,000 RPM, each valve opened and closed 150 times per second. The timing had to be perfect within thousandths of a second, or the engine would destroy itself. Carburetor synchronization required skills that bordered on mechanical artistry. 6 individual Cayenne carburetors had to deliver identical fuel mixtures to each cylinder. A slight imbalance would cause vibrations that could crack the delicate engine cases. The ignition system fired 6 spark plugs in perfect sequence. This created electrical demands that pushed 1960s technology to its absolute limits. Each spark had to occur at precisely the right millisecond, coordinated with valve timing and fuel delivery. Honda's engineers had created what was essentially 6 separate motorcycle engines that happened to share the same crankcase. The complexity was staggering. The precision requirements were beyond anything attempted before, and somehow it all worked reliably enough to win world championships. The engineering tolerances required were beyond anything Honda had attempted. Components had to be manufactured to precision measured in thousandths of an inch. Assembly required skills more like watchmaking than motorcycle building. Factory mechanics spent hours balancing each engine. They had to ensure that 6 cylinders worked together rather than fighting each other. The slightest imbalance would create vibrations that could shake the entire machine apart at racing speeds. But when everything worked perfectly, the RC166 was unstoppable. Honda needed a rider who could handle a machine operating in a completely different realm from conventional motorcycles. They needed someone with the skill to manage an engine that demanded perfection and the courage to trust technology that had never been tested in real racing conditions. Mike Hailwood had spent his career riding for MV Agusta, Honda's primary competition in the 250cc class. He was the most successful rider of his generation. He was equally comfortable on different types of machines and in different racing conditions. Getting Hailwood to switch sides would be like convincing a Ferrari driver to race for a startup company. MV Agusta offered prestige, proven technology, and guaranteed factory support. Honda's approach was typically methodical. They didn't just offer Hailwood money or promises, they offered him the RC166 for a test ride. The financial details of Honda's offer to Hailwood were never made public, but industry sources suggested it was the largest contract ever offered to a motorcycle racer. Honda was betting their entire racing reputation on one rider and one machine. Hailwood's decision to leave MV Agusta created shockwaves throughout European racing. He wasn't just switching teams, he was abandoning everything that had made him famous. The Italian press called it the greatest betrayal in racing history. Hailwood had won multiple championships on MV Agusta machines. He had established himself as the premier rider in the world. Now he was walking away from guaranteed success to ride an unproven Japanese machine. Count Domenico Agusta took the defection personally. He had treated Hailwood like a son. He had provided him with factory support and treated him like family. The Count publicly declared that Hailwood would never ride an MV Agusta again. European racing fans felt personally betrayed. Hailwood wasn't just their champion, he was their representative against growing Japanese influence in motorcycle racing. But Honda offered something MV Agusta couldn't match, the RC166. The first time Hailwood tested the RC166 at Suzuka, he understood what Honda had built. The bike felt completely different from anything in his considerable experience. Where MV Agusta machines delivered power through torque and character, the RC166 delivered power through pure mechanical precision. Hailwood had ridden fast motorcycles before, but none had prepared him for the RC166's unique characteristics. The relentless power delivery was so smooth it felt almost electric. There was no vibration, no roughness, just relentless acceleration that seemed to have no upper limit. More importantly, the RC166 felt unbreakable. MV Agusta machines required constant attention and careful handling. They were temperamental artists that demanded respect and patience. The RC166 felt like a precision tool that could handle whatever punishment racing demanded. During testing, Hailwood discovered he could ride the RC166 in ways that were impossible on conventional bikes. The 7-speed gearbox meant he could keep the engine in its power band through technical sections. The smooth power delivery meant he could use full throttle earlier coming out of corners. Most surprisingly, the RC166 felt stable at speeds that would make other 250cc bikes dangerous. The narrow engine design created a lower center of gravity, and the precise engineering meant everything worked together instead of fighting each other. Hailwood's riding style was described as silky smooth, which perfectly suited the RC166's characteristics. Where other riders had to muscle their bikes around corners, Hailwood could flow with the RC166's precision. The bike rewarded smooth inputs and punished aggressive moves. The RC166 changed how Hailwood approached racing lines. Traditional motorcycles required careful throttle control to avoid wheelies or loss of traction. The RC166's smooth power delivery meant Hailwood could use more throttle earlier in corners without upsetting the bike's balance. Braking became a completely different skill on the RC166. The engine's high compression created strong engine braking when Hailwood rolled off the throttle. Combined with the bike's excellent weight distribution, this meant he could brake later and harder than competitors without losing stability. Corner entry speeds that would be dangerous on other 250cc bikes felt comfortable on the RC166. The precise engineering meant everything worked together. The suspension, frame, engine, and wheels all contributed to a package that felt unshakable at racing speeds. Most importantly, Hailwood could trust the engine to deliver consistent power lap after lap. Honda's racing program had finally achieved what European manufacturers took for granted: absolute reliability combined with superior performance. The 1966 season opened with skepticism from racing journalists and competitors. The RC166 looked strange with its narrow engine and unusual proportions. Many predicted it would be fast but fragile. The first races proved the skeptics wrong in devastating fashion. Race officials had never seen qualifying gaps like what Hailwood achieved on the RC166. At most tracks, pole position might be won by a few tenths of a second. Hailwood was qualifying seconds faster than the competition. These were margins that suggested either timing errors or a completely different category of machine. The sound during qualifying sessions became part of the spectacle. Spectators would hear the normal racing bikes putting in their laps, creating the familiar sounds of 1960s Grand Prix racing. Then the RC166 would appear, and that distinctive six-cylinder scream would echo across the circuit like nothing anyone had experienced. Other riders reported that hearing the RC166 during practice sessions was psychologically devastating. They would be pushing their machines to absolute limits, extracting every possible tenth of a second from their equipment, only to hear Honda's machine approach from behind at what seemed like impossible speeds. At the season opener, Hailwood qualified on pole by a margin that should have been impossible. His lap times were so fast that officials double-checked their timing equipment. During the race, Hailwood demonstrated both his skill and the RC166's capabilities. He could brake later than anyone else because the engine compression helped slow the bike. He could accelerate harder out of corners because the power delivery was perfectly smooth. The RC166's advantage wasn't just straight-line speed. The bike was superior in every aspect of racing performance. Corner entry, mid-corner speed, corner exit, and straight-line acceleration all favored Honda's machine by significant margins. Watching Hailwood on the RC166 was like watching someone play a different sport than everyone else. While competitors fought their machines through corners and struggled to manage power delivery, Hailwood looked like he was on a relaxing ride through the countryside. Television commentators struggled to find appropriate language for what they were witnessing. Traditional racing terminology didn't capture the scale of Honda's advantage. Words like dominant and superior seemed inadequate for describing a machine that operated in a completely different performance realm. Most importantly, he could maintain speeds that left other riders struggling just to stay competitive. When Hailwood crossed the finish line, he had won by over 30 seconds. In a 20-lap race, that margin represented complete domination. Second place was so far behind that spectators had difficulty believing they were watching the same race. But here's where the story gets interesting. After climbing off the RC166 in the pits, Mike Hailwood, the man famous for never shutting up about racing, stood completely silent for nearly 5 minutes. Journalists surrounded him, asking about the bike, the race, his feelings about beating his former teammates. Hailwood just stood there, helmet in hand, staring at the RC166 like he couldn't quite believe what had happened. Finally, someone asked him directly, "Mike, what was that like?" Hailwood's response was uncharacteristic. "I've never ridden anything like it. I don't think anyone has." The press conference that followed revealed more about what Hailwood had experienced. When asked about specific aspects of the bike's performance, he struggled to find comparisons. The RC166 didn't fit into existing categories of racing motorcycles. European racing journalists had covered motorcycle racing for decades. They understood how different bikes behaved, how different engines delivered power, how riders adapted their techniques. The RC166 challenged everything they thought they knew about motorcycle performance. Hailwood tried to describe the sound from the rider's perspective. You don't hear individual cylinders firing like on other bikes. It's just one continuous note that gets higher and higher. At full throttle, it sounds like the bike is screaming because it wants to go even faster. That was it. No technical analysis, no detailed explanation, no colourful stories. The RC166 had left Mike Hailwood speechless because it had shown him possibilities he didn't know existed. Technical journalists who examined the RC166 after races were equally amazed. The level of engineering precision was unlike anything they'd seen in motorcycle racing. Every component looked more like aircraft parts than motorcycle hardware. The magnesium engine cases were so thin they felt fragile. They had to withstand enormous stresses from six-cylinder spinning at racing speeds. The titanium valves were works of art that happened to function as engine components. Even the carburetor setup impressed experienced mechanics. 6 individual Cayenne carburetors had to work in perfect harmony. The slightest imbalance would create power delivery issues that could cost races or destroy engines. Honda's mechanics spent hours before each race session checking carburetor synchronization with vacuum gauges. The process was more complex than tuning 6 separate motorcycles, but the results justified the effort. What made Honda's success even more remarkable was how quickly they developed their technology. In 1959, they were racing simple twin-cylinder bikes that could barely compete. By 1966, they had created the most advanced motorcycle engine in the world. This wasn't just slow progress over decades. Honda squeezed 20 years of normal development into just 7 years through determination and massive engineering investment. But here's something most people don't realize about that perfect 1966 season. The rest of 1966 became a victory parade. Hailwood and the RC166 won 10 of 10 races in the 250cc class, creating what racing historians call the most dominant season in motorcycle Grand Prix history. Each victory margin became larger as the season progressed. What started as impressive wins turned into embarrassing domination. By mid-season, second place was usually a full lap behind Hailwood. Other manufacturers attempted desperate measures to compete. Yamaha developed new 2-stroke engines. MV Agusta redesigned their 4-cylinder bikes. Nothing worked. The RC166 was operating in a different performance category. Racing fans started attending races specifically to hear the RC166. The bike became more famous for its sound rather than its speed. People would buy tickets knowing Honda would win, but wanting to experience that mechanical symphony in person. Television coverage struggled with Honda's complete dominance. Races became predictable to watch because the outcome was decided after the first corner. Commentators spent more time discussing the RC166's engineering than actual race action. Yamaha's engineers attended every race, taking detailed notes and photographs. They were trying to understand how Honda had achieved such incredible performance from 250cc. Their own two-stroke engines produced more peak power but couldn't match the RC166's overall package. The 1966 season established a pattern that would repeat throughout Honda's racing history. They would enter a new category, dominate completely, then move on to bigger challenges. But the RC166's impact went beyond just winning races. It proved that Japanese engineering could create machines that were not just competitive but completely superior to European alternatives. European motorcycle manufacturers had dominated racing for 50 years. They had the experience, the tradition, and the reputation. Honda had been making motorcycles for less than 20 years, yet Honda's engineers had solved problems that European manufacturers didn't even know existed. The RC166's reliability was as impressive as its speed. When competitors broke down or wore out, Honda's bikes finished every race they entered. This reliability gave Hailwood confidence to push harder than ever before. He knew the bike wouldn't let him down, so he could focus entirely on extracting maximum performance instead of managing mechanical limitations. Halfway through the season, the championship was already decided. Honda had achieved something that seemed impossible. They had built a machine so superior that competition became meaningless. Other manufacturers scrambled to respond, but Honda had achieved something that couldn't be copied quickly. The six-cylinder concept was so advanced that it wouldn't be seen again in motorcycle racing for decades. Honda had built a machine that was ahead of its time by years, possibly decades. The Honda RC166 didn't just silence Mike Hailwood on that day at Monza, it silenced an entire industry that thought they knew the limits of motorcycle performance. And in that silence, you could hear the future arriving at 18,000 revolutions per minute. Was it the greatest 250cc Grand Prix bike of all time, or just the most ambitious? Let us know in the comments, and if you want more stories about the machines that changed racing forever, hit that subscribe button.